The city was waking up when the little girl appeared at the corner of Via Marquez. Tiny backpack, hair still messy from sleep, shoelaces uneven, and eyes wide, scared, searching. She stopped in front of him, the man every adult crossed the street to avoid. The man newspapers called the ghost of Palermo, the man whose name police only whispered, a mafia boss. He was stepping out of his black sedan when she tugged his coat. "Sir," she whispered, "can you walk me to school today? I don't feel safe." His entire crew froze. His driver swallowed hard. Even the street dogs seemed to stop breathing. No one asked him for safety. People asked him for mercy, or debt extensions, or forgiveness for mistakes they didn't survive. But never this. He knelt slowly, his voice low. "Why aren't you safe, Piccolina?" The girl hesitated, then pointed across the street. A man stood watching her, hands buried in his pockets, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The boss's own pulse ticked once, sharp, because he recognized that face. A predator, a trafficker, a man the mafia itself refused to do business with. The little girl's voice broke again. "I just want to get to school today without him following me." The mafia boss stood up, and what he did next in broad daylight, on a quiet street, in front of half-asleep neighbors, shook the entire city and started a war no one saw coming. Stay with me until the end, because the truth behind that little girl's fear and the boss's reaction will leave you speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Her name was Sofia Benedetti, 7 years old, born in the heart of Palermo's most dangerous neighborhood, where children learn to walk quietly and speak even quieter, where mothers kept their daughters close, and fathers worked 3 jobs just to survive another month. Sofia lived with her grandmother, Nonna Maria, in a cramped apartment above the old bakery on Via Marquez. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. The kind of accident that happened when you couldn't afford to fix your brakes, and winter rain made the mountain roads deadly. Nonna Maria was 73, arthritic hands, failing eyesight, a pension so small it barely covered their rent. She loved Sofia with everything she had left, but love doesn't stop predators from hunting. For 3 weeks, Sofia had been telling her grandmother about the man, how he waited near the school gates every morning, how he followed her down Via Torino, how he knew her name even though she'd never spoken to him. "He always smiles at me, Nonna," Sofia had whispered one evening, picking at her pasta. "But his smile makes my stomach hurt." Nonna Maria had called the police, twice. Officer Ricci took notes, nodded sympathetically, and explained that without evidence of actual contact or threats, they couldn't investigate. "Children have active imaginations," he said. "Sometimes they misinterpret friendly gestures from adults." The school principal, Signora Ferretti, was equally dismissive. Perhaps Sofia was struggling to adjust after losing her parents. Perhaps she needed counseling. Perhaps Nonna Maria was being overprotective. But Sofia knew what she saw. The man wasn't friendly. He was hunting. And every morning, the hunt got bolder. This particular morning, October 15th, Sofia had woken to find Nonna Maria collapsed in the kitchen. Not dead, just exhausted. Her medications had run out 3 days earlier. The pharmacy wouldn't extend credit anymore. Her body was simply giving up. Sofia made her grandmother tea, covered her with the good blanket, and kissed her forehead. "Stay in bed today, Nonna. I can walk to school myself." But as she stepped onto Via Marquez, backpack bouncing against her small frame, she saw him immediately, leaning against the fountain, watching, waiting. And for the first time in 3 weeks, he wasn't pretending to read a newspaper or check his phone. He was staring directly at her, his smile wider than ever. Sofia's feet stopped moving. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked back toward her building, but Nonna Maria couldn't help her. She looked toward the school 6 blocks away and saw only empty streets. That's when the black sedan pulled up to the curb. Salvatore Romano, 46 years old, third-generation mafia boss, A man who controlled half the docks, a quarter of the construction contracts, and every illegal gambling operation south of the cathedral. His reputation was built on calculated violence and absolute loyalty to his code. But Salvatore had a rule that separated him from other bosses in the city. Children were untouchable. Not just his own daughter, who lived safely in Milan with her mother. All children. Anyone who harmed a child answered to him personally. This rule had cost him money. Trafficking routes he wouldn't take. Drug operations he wouldn't fund. Partnerships he'd refused. But some lines couldn't be crossed. Not even for profit. When Sofia approached his car that morning, tiny hand reaching for his expensive coat, Salvatore saw something that made his blood run cold. Pure terror in a child's eyes. The kind of fear that meant someone was about to do something unforgivable. "Can you walk me to school today? I don't feel safe." 6 words that changed everything. Salvatore followed her pointed finger across the street. Marco Vitelli, 42 years old. A man whose business card might have said import-export, but whose real profession was trafficking children to wealthy clients across Europe. Vitelli had approached Salvatore's organization 3 times in the past year, each time offering partnerships, shared territory, mutual profit. Each time Salvatore had declined. Not because trafficking wasn't profitable, it was enormously profitable, but because some money came with a price too high to pay. Now Vitelli was hunting in Salvatore's neighborhood, on his street, targeting a child who'd just asked him for protection. Salvatore's driver, Antonio, watched in his rearview mirror as his boss knelt beside the little girl. "Boss," Antonio whispered, "we're going to be late for the meeting with the Port Authority." Salvatore ignored him. His full attention was on Sofia, whose brown eyes held more courage than most grown men he knew. "What's your name, Piccolina?" "Sofia Benedetti. I live with my Nonna Maria above the bakery." "And the man across the street? How long has he been following you?" 3 weeks, every morning. Sometimes after school, too. Yesterday he knew my name when I'd never told him." Salvatore felt something shift inside his chest. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something that had been building for years as he watched his city slowly poison itself with human trafficking and child exploitation. He stood slowly, his mind already calculating. Vitelli was armed, probably had backup nearby. This was a public street with witnesses. Any move Salvatore made would be seen, recorded, investigated. But there were some things more important than discretion. He looked at Sofia again, this brave little girl who'd asked the most dangerous man in Palermo for help, because every safe adult in her life had failed her. He thought about his own daughter, safe in Milan because he had the power to protect her. He thought about all the children who didn't have that protection. Salvatore made a decision that would reshape the balance of power in Sicily. He took Sofia's small hand in his large one and began walking toward the school. But first he made eye contact with Marco Vitelli across the street. The message in that look was unmistakable. You picked the wrong child, on the wrong street, in the wrong neighborhood. And what happened next would prove that even in a city built on violence and corruption, some lines could never be crossed. As Salvatore and Sofia walked hand in hand down Via Marquez, something extraordinary began to happen. Windows opened, curtains parted. Neighbors who normally avoided eye contact stepped onto their balconies, because seeing the ghost of Palermo walking a 7-year-old to school was like watching a lion protect a lamb. It didn't make sense. It defied everything they thought they knew about their neighborhood's most feared resident. But Sofia felt safer than she had in weeks. This man's presence was like a shield around her. His grip on her hand was gentle but absolute, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. "Tell me about your nonna," Salvatore said quietly as they walked. "She's sick today. Her medicine costs too much money. Sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping because she can't buy food and medicine in the same week." Salvatore's jaw tightened. He knew this story. Knew it because it played out in dozens of apartments around his neighborhood. Elderly people choosing between medication and meals. children going hungry because their guardians couldn't afford both rent and groceries. The system was broken, had been broken for decades. Politicians promised change every election cycle, then disappeared into their comfortable offices and forgot about Via Marquez entirely. Behind them, Marco Vitelli had begun following, not close enough to be obvious, but close enough to send a message. He was still hunting, still claiming his territory. Salvatore felt the familiar weight of his pistol against his ribs. One quick movement and Vitelli would never threaten another child. But killing a man in broad daylight while holding a 7-year-old's hand wasn't just reckless. It was exactly what his enemies wanted. Evidence that he'd lost control. Proof that emotion made him unpredictable. Instead, Salvatore pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Luca," he said when his lieutenant answered, "I need you to make some visits today, starting with the pharmacy on Via Torino, then the grocery store, then the landlord who owns the building above the old bakery." "What kind of visits, boss?" "The kind where you explain that certain people in this neighborhood are under our protection now, starting with Nonna Maria Benedetti and her granddaughter Sofia." Sofia looked up at him, not understanding the words, but sensing their importance. Salvatore squeezed her hand gently. "Also," he continued into the phone, "I need background checks on every adult male who's been seen near the elementary school in the past month, especially anyone asking questions about children's schedules or family situations." This wasn't just about Sofia anymore. If Vitelli was hunting in this neighborhood, other predators might be too. The realization made Salvatore's chest tight with rage. They were 3 blocks from the school when Sofia suddenly stopped walking. "What is it, Piccolina?" She pointed ahead. Standing directly in front of the school gates was another man, younger than Vitelli, cleaner clothes, but the same predatory stillness. "That's his friend," Sofia whispered. "He started coming last week. They talk to each other sometimes." Salvatore felt something snap inside his chest. This wasn't random. This was organized, systematic. A hunting operation targeting children in his neighborhood while he'd been focused on port deals and construction contracts. He knelt beside Sofia again. "Listen to me carefully. When we get to school, I want you to go straight to your classroom. Don't stop to talk to anyone. Don't look back. Can you do that for me?" Sofia nodded, but her eyes were wide with new fear. "Are you going to hurt them?" The question hit Salvatore like a physical blow, because in that moment, looking at this brave little girl who'd asked him for protection, he realized something profound. Violence was the only language he'd ever spoken fluently, the only solution he'd ever trusted completely. But Sofia wasn't asking him to hurt anyone. She was asking him to keep her safe. There was a difference that mattered. "I'm going to make sure they never frighten you again," he said finally, "but not the way you're thinking." As they approached the school, Salvatore's mind was already working, calculating, planning, not just how to eliminate Vitelli and his partner, but how to protect every child in this neighborhood permanently. Because Sofia's courage had shown him something he'd been blind to for years. His power meant nothing if the innocent couldn't sleep safely in their beds. His territory was worthless if children couldn't walk to school without fear. The other mothers at the school gates stared in stunned silence as Salvatore Romano delivered Sofia safely to the entrance. Some crossed themselves. Others grabbed their own children closer. But Sofia turned back to him with a smile that could have melted winter itself. "Thank you," she said simply. "Will you walk me home too?" Salvatore looked at this remarkable child who'd changed the course of his entire day with 6 simple words. Then he looked at the predators watching from across the street. Men who thought children were commodities to be harvested and sold. "Every day," he promised, "until you feel safe again." But as Sofia disappeared into the school building, Salvatore knew this war was just beginning. Because word would spread quickly through Palermo's underground. The ghost had chosen a side. The most powerful crime boss in the city was now personally protecting a 7-year-old girl. Some would see it as weakness, others as an opportunity. But Vitelli and his network would see it as a declaration of war, and they would be absolutely right. Because Salvatore Romano was about to prove that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Some innocence was worth preserving, even if it meant burning down everything he'd built. The real battle for Sofia's safety was just beginning, and it would shake the foundations of organized crime in Sicily forever. That evening, word reached Vitelli's network faster than wildfire through dry wheat. The ghost of Palermo had personally escorted a child to school. More than that, he'd made promises. Promises that meant protection. Promises that meant interference with their operations. Marco Vitelli sat in his warehouse office, staring at surveillance photos his men had taken throughout the day. Pictures of Salvatore walking hand in hand with Sofia. Pictures of his lieutenants visiting local businesses. Pictures of increased security around the elementary school. His partner, Alessandro Greco, paced behind him like a caged animal. This is a problem, Marco. A big problem. Vitelli leaned back in his chair, his mind calculating. No, this is an opportunity. How do you figure that? Romano just showed the entire city his weakness. He's emotionally invested in one little girl. That makes him predictable, vulnerable. Greco stopped pacing. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we accelerate our timeline. Force his hand. Make him choose between his reputation and his new pet project. What neither man understood was that their conversation was being recorded. Because Salvatore Romano hadn't survived 20 years in organized crime by being reactive. He'd learned long ago that the best defense was knowing your enemy's next move before they made it. 3 blocks away, in an abandoned apartment building, Luca Toretti adjusted his headphones and smiled grimly. The listening device his men had planted in Vitelli's office 3 months earlier was finally paying dividends. He reached for his encrypted phone and dialed his boss. They're planning something for tomorrow morning, Luca reported. Wants to force your hand, make you choose between reputation and the girl. Salvatore stood on his balcony overlooking the harbor, watching cargo ships move like ghosts through the evening mist. Let me guess. They're going to make a move on Sofia to draw me out. That's what it sounds like. You want me to increase security around her grandmother's building? No. Salvatore's voice was cold, calculated. I want you to do something else entirely. The next morning, Sofia woke to the sound of her grandmother crying in the kitchen. But these weren't tears of pain or frustration. These were tears of overwhelming relief. Nonna, what's wrong? Maria Benedetti held up a paper bag filled with medications. Every prescription she needed, every treatment she'd been forced to skip. A man came by last night, Piccolina. A very polite man. He said these were paid for, all of them, for the next year. Sofia's eyes widened. The nice man from yesterday? I think so, yes. Nonna Maria's voice trembled. And there's more. The landlord called. Our rent is paid through Christmas. And the grocery store, they said we have credit now. Good credit. Sofia didn't fully understand what this meant, but she understood that the tight lines around her grandmother's eyes had relaxed for the first time in months, that Nonna Maria was standing straighter, moving without wincing. As they prepared for school that morning, Sofia felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, real, genuine hope, that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. But 3 blocks away, Marco Vitelli was putting his plan into motion. The girl leaves her building at 8:15 every morning, he told his team. Romano can't be everywhere. He has other businesses to run, other obligations. Today we grab her before he shows up. His lieutenant, Franco Torino, shifted uncomfortably. Boss, taking a kid directly, that's going to bring heat. Serious heat. That's exactly what I want, Vitelli snapped. Romano thinks he can interfere with our operations because he has some sentimental attachment to one child. Today, he learns what happens when emotion clouds, judgment. What Vitelli didn't know was that Salvatore had anticipated this exact move, because men like Vitelli were predictable in their arrogance. They always escalated, always pushed harder when pushed back. At 8 o'clock sharp, Sofia stepped out of her building with her grandmother. They decided to walk to school together today. Nonna Maria felt strong enough, energized by the medication she'd finally been able to take. But as they turned the corner onto Via Marquez, they found something extraordinary waiting for them. Salvatore Romano wasn't alone. Standing with him were 12 men in dark suits, not his usual crew. These were different. Older, more distinguished. Men whose presence commanded respect, even from other crime bosses. Sofia recognized Salvatore immediately and ran toward him with the fearless enthusiasm only children possess. "You came back. I promised I would," he said, kneeling to her level. "But today I brought some friends." The men behind him nodded politely to Sofia and her grandmother. Their demeanor was respectful, almost grandfatherly, but their eyes remained alert, scanning the street with professional precision. Nonna Maria approached cautiously. "Signor Romano, I don't know how to thank you for yesterday. The medicine, the rent, everything. No thanks necessary, Signora Benedetti. Sofia is under our protection now. That protection extends to family." As they began walking toward school, Sofia noticed something different about the neighborhood. More people were on the streets than usual. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways. Mothers with children walked purposefully in the same direction. "Why are there so many people today?" she asked. Salvatore smiled. "Word gets around quickly in small neighborhoods, Piccolina. People heard about what happened yesterday. They want to show support." What he didn't tell her was that half the people on the street were his associates, positioned strategically to intercept any threat. The other half were genuine neighbors who'd been inspired by seeing their most feared resident protect their most vulnerable child. 2 blocks from school, Vitelli's plan began to unfold. Franco Torino stepped out from behind a parked car, moving toward Sofia with practiced casualness. In his mind, the grab would be simple. Snatch the girl while Romano was distracted, disappear into the maze of alleyways behind the market. He made it exactly 3 steps before finding himself surrounded. Not by Salvatore's men, by the neighbors themselves. Mrs. Conti, the baker's wife, stepped directly into his path. "Excuse me, but you're walking the wrong direction." Mr. Alberti, who ran the newsstand, appeared at Franco's left shoulder. "Yes, school is that way. Are you lost?" More neighbors materialized as if from nowhere. Not threatening, just present. Creating a human wall between Franco and Sofia without anyone saying a word about what was actually happening. Franco looked around in confusion and growing panic. This wasn't how the plan was supposed to work. Where was the chaos? Where was the opportunity? Salvatore watched from 20 feet away, Sofia's hand secure in his, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Pride. Not in his own power, but in his community. These people had seen evil approaching one of their children and instinctively moved to protect her. Franco retreated, pulling out his phone to call Vitelli. But before he could dial, 2 police officers approached him from behind. "Excuse me, sir," Officer Ricci said politely. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Franco's eyes went wide. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Of course not. Just routine. But we'll need to see some identification." What Franco didn't know was that Officer Ricci had received an anonymous tip 20 minutes earlier. A detailed report about men planning to kidnap a child from this exact location. The tip included Franco's description, his license plate number, and his criminal record. As Franco was led away for questioning, Vitelli watched from his car a block away, his carefully planned operation crumbling before his eyes. Sofia arrived at school that morning, surrounded by more protection than visiting royalty. Not just Salvatore and his men, but dozens of neighbors who'd decided that protecting their children was everyone's responsibility. Principal Ferretti, who'd dismissed Sofia's fears just days earlier, now stood at the school gates watching this unprecedented display of community solidarity. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly, as she realized how catastrophically she'd misjudged the situation. "Signor Romano," she said as they approached, "perhaps we should discuss increased security measures for the school." Perhaps you should have listened when a child told you she was afraid, Salvatore replied coldly. But yes, we'll be discussing security, among other things. As Sofia disappeared into the building, safe and smiling, Salvatore turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Neighbors, shopkeepers, parents, people who'd lived in fear for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up. What happened here today? He said, his voice carrying across the street. This is how it should always be. Children protected, community united, evil recognized and stopped before it can take root. He paused, making eye contact with faces he'd known for years, but never truly seen. This neighborhood belongs to all of us, and all of us have a responsibility to keep it safe. But even as the crowd dispersed, even as normal life resumed, Salvatore knew this victory was temporary. Vitelli would regroup, plan differently, escalate further, because men like Vitelli didn't surrender, they adapted, and the war for Sofia's safety, for every child's safety in Palermo, was far from over. In fact, it was about to get much worse, because that afternoon, 3 more children would go missing from schools across the city. Children from neighborhoods where no mafia boss offered protection. Children whose disappearances would send a clear message to Salvatore Romano. You can't protect them all. Protect them all. The news reached Salvatore at 3:47 that afternoon. 3 children. Gone. Vanished from their schools like smoke in the wind. 8-year-old Marco from San Lorenzo Elementary. 10-year-old Elena from the Catholic school near the cathedral. 6-year-old Giuseppe from the public school in Borgo Vecchio. All taken within hours of Sofia's protected arrival at Jefferson Elementary. All from neighborhoods where Salvatore Romano had no presence, no influence, no ability to intervene. The message was crystal clear. You saved one. We took 3. Luca burst into Salvatore's office without knocking, his face ashen. Boss, we have a problem. Multiple problems. Salvatore looked up from the police reports spread across his mahogany desk. Each missing child report felt like a blade twisting in his chest. Vitelli's sending a message. It's worse than that. Luca placed a manila envelope on the desk. This was delivered an hour ago. No return address. No witnesses. Inside were photographs. Recent photographs. Sofia walking to school that morning, surrounded by protection. Sofia laughing with her grandmother. Sofia playing in the small courtyard behind her building. But it wasn't the photos themselves that made Salvatore's blood turn to ice. It was what was written on the back of each image. Today, 3 children paid for your interference. Tomorrow, it could be her. The handwriting was elegant, educated, not the scrawl of a street thug, but the careful script of someone who took pleasure in psychological warfare. Salvatore set the photos down with deliberate calm, but his hands were trembling with barely contained rage. Where are the families of the missing children? Police stations, hospitals, going insane with worry. The Benedetti boy's mother hasn't stopped screaming for 4 hours straight. And the police response? Luca's expression darkened. They're treating it as separate incidents. No connection. Standard missing persons protocols. They'll start real investigating in 72 hours if the kids don't turn up. 72 hours. In Salvatore's world, 72 hours might as well be 72 years. Children taken by traffickers had maybe 12 hours before they disappeared forever into networks that stretched across continents. Get me addresses for all 3 families, Salvatore said, standing, and mobilize everyone. Every associate, every contact, every favor we're owed. I want this city turned inside out. Boss, this could be a trap. Vitelli might be trying to draw us out, spread our resources thin while he makes another move on Sofia. Salvatore paused at his office window, staring down at the harbor where legitimate cargo ships mixed with vessels carrying darker cargo. Then we don't give him that opportunity. He turned back to Luca, his decision crystallizing. Double Sofia's protection. Triple it. I want her grandmother's building locked down like a fortress, but we're not abandoning those other children. The families won't trust us. We're the mafia. They'll think we're involved. Then we'll have to prove them wrong. What Salvatore was contemplating went against every principle of organized crime he'd ever learned. Mafia bosses didn't rescue random children from rival operations. They didn't expose themselves to help families who couldn't pay for protection. But looking at those photographs of Sofia, remembering the trust in her 7-year-old eyes when she'd asked for his help, Salvatore realized something profound. Some things mattered more than tradition. Some fights were worth having regardless of the strategic cost. 20 minutes later, Salvatore Romano walked into the cramped apartment where Marco Benedetti's mother sat surrounded by useless police officers and well-meaning neighbors. The room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the crying paused, as everyone recognized the most powerful crime boss in Palermo standing in their doorway. Mrs. Benedetti looked up through swollen eyes, her face a mask of grief and exhaustion. "What do you want? Haven't we suffered enough?" Salvatore removed his expensive hat, holding it respectfully in both hands. "Signora, I'm here to help find your son." "Help?" Her voice cracked with bitter laughter. "People like you are the reason children disappear in the first place." The accusation hit him like a physical blow because it carried truth. How many times had his organization looked the other way when children suffered? How many times had profit mattered more than protection? "You're right," he said quietly. "But today that changes. I give you my word that I will find Marco and bring him home safe." Mrs. Benedetti stared at him, searching his face for deception, for the angle, for the trap she knew had to be coming. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." The police officers in the room exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't how organized crime worked. There were always conditions, always prices, always debts to be paid later. But Salvatore's lieutenant whispered something in his ear that made everything clear. "Boss, the boy, Marco Benedetti. He's the same age your daughter was when you sent her to Milan." The connection hit Salvatore like lightning. His own daughter, Isabella, safe in her private school, hundreds of miles away, because he had the power to protect her. But what about the children whose fathers weren't crime bosses? What about the innocent who had no one to call when evil came knocking? He knelt beside Mrs. Benedetti's chair, speaking directly to her, ignoring everyone else in the room. "I have a daughter too, Signora. She's safe because I made sure she was safe. But you're Marco, Elena from the cathedral school, little Giuseppe from Borgo Vecchio. They deserve the same safety my Isabella has. You know about the other children? They were taken to send me a message, because yesterday morning, a brave little girl asked me to walk her to school, and I said yes. Now 3 children are paying the price for my decision to protect one." Mrs. Benedetti's face crumpled. "So this is my fault? Marco is gone because you helped someone else?" "No." Salvatore's voice carried absolute conviction. "This is the fault of men who think children are commodities to be bought and sold. But I promise you this on my daughter's life. I will find Marco. I will find all of them." He stood, addressing the room. "To everyone here, spread the word. Salvatore Romano is personally guaranteeing the safe return of these children. Anyone with information, any information at all, will be rewarded beyond their imagination. Anyone who interferes will answer to me personally." As he prepared to leave, Mrs. Benedetti called after him. "Why? Why would you risk everything for children who aren't yours?" Salvatore paused in the doorway, thinking of Sofia's courage, of his own daughter's safety, of all the times he'd chosen profit over protection. Because someone has to, and maybe it's time the most powerful people in this city used that power for something worth fighting for. 6 words from a 7-year-old girl changed everything in Palermo. Sofia's courage to ask the most feared man in the city for help didn't just save her life. It awakened something in Salvatore Romano that had been buried under decades of calculated violence. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truth. Sometimes protecting one child means protecting them all. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button because courage comes in all sizes, and heroes aren't always who you expect them to be.